Dedication to Lorenzo de' Medici. It was the custom, in Machiavelli's day, for a man seeking a prince's favor to come bearing the gift he prized most: fine horses, weapons, cloth of gold, precious stones. Machiavelli has no such treasure. What he owns and values above everything is his understanding of the deeds of great men, earned through long experience of modern affairs and a constant study of the ancient world. He has pressed that knowledge into one small book, and he lays it before Lorenzo. The gift may seem unworthy of so great a man, he admits. Yet he can imagine nothing more valuable than the means to grasp, in a few short hours, what cost him years of danger and hardship to learn. He has stripped the work of ornament, no swelling phrases, no rhetorical decoration. He wants it judged on one thing only: the weight and truth of its subject. Then comes the image that frames the entire book. A man of low and humble station, he says, may still dare to discuss how princes should rule. Just as a landscape painter goes down into the plain to study the mountains, and climbs high onto the mountains to study the plain, so to know the people fully one must be a prince, and to know princes fully one must be an ordinary citizen. He is that ordinary citizen looking up. He asks only that the gift be taken in the spirit it is sent. And beneath the courtesy he lets one bitter note sound: the great and unrelenting malice of fortune that has kept a man of his gifts down in the shadows. The whole book, in the end, is his bid to understand that fortune, and to teach a prince how to master it. Chapter 1. How many kinds of principality there are and the ways in which they are acquired. Machiavelli opens by drawing a map of his subject, swiftly and without a wasted word. Every state that has ever held power over men, he says, is one of two things: a republic or a principality. Republics he sets aside. This book is about princes. A principality is either hereditary, its ruling family long established, or it is new. And the new come in two forms. Some are brand new from nothing, as Milan was for Francesco Sforza, who built a dukedom where his family had none. Others are like a limb grafted onto a ruler's existing state, the way the kingdom of Naples was joined to the crown of Spain. These new acquisitions differ again. Some were used to living under a prince, others were used to being free. And a man wins them in one of a few ways: with the arms of others or with his own, by sheer luck or by his own ability. That last pair is the hinge of everything that follows. Fortune and prowess, the gift of circumstance on one side, and on the other a man's own skill, nerve, and judgment. The entire book is an unfolding of this short list. Each kind of state, each route to power will get its own chapter and its own hard lessons. It is the table of contents of a ruthless education. Chapter 2. Hereditary Principalities. Begin with the easy case. A prince who inherits a state long accustomed to his family has, Machiavelli argues, far less to fear than a newcomer. He need only do one modest thing: not abandon the institutions his ancestors built, and then bend with events as they come. Do that, and short of some extraordinary and overwhelming force, he will keep his throne. Even if he is briefly knocked off it, the first stumble by the usurper hands it back. The example is the Duke of Ferrara, whose house survived a Venetian assault and later a war with Pope Julius, not through brilliance, but through the sheer age and depth of his line. The old prince is secure for a plain reason. He has less cause to give offense, and so is naturally more loved. Unless he provokes hatred with some monstrous vice, his subjects wish him well by default. The long habit of his rule has worn the memory of how it began smooth. People forget the original seizure, the grievances that once burned. And one change, Machiavelli notes, always leaves behind a jagged edge, what masons call a toothing stone, the projecting brick left to bond the next wall, on which the following change can build. Time and habit are the hereditary prince's quiet armor. The new prince, stripped of both, will spend the rest of this book trying to manufacture them. Chapter 3. Composite Principalities. Now the trouble begins. When a prince adds new territory to an old state, he runs into a difficulty woven into human nature itself. Men change rulers gladly, certain the next one will treat them better, and so they take up arms to help him in. Then they discover the trap. The new prince is forced to disappoint them. His soldiers must be billeted. His conquest brings 1,000 fresh burdens, and the very people who opened the gates turn bitter. You have injured those you harmed in taking the state, and you cannot keep the friendship of those who let you in. This, says Machiavelli, is why Louis XII of France seized Milan and lost it almost overnight twice. Holding such a conquest turns on the ground itself. If the new land shares your language and customs, it is easy. Snuff out the old ruling line and change nothing else. No new laws, no new taxes, and it melts into your state as Burgundy and Brittany did into France. But if the land is foreign in tongue and custom, you need fortune and great energy. The surest remedy is to go and live there yourself, as the Turkish Sultan settled in conquered Greece. On the spot, you catch trouble while it is small. Failing that, plant colonies, they cost little, injure only a scattered few, and anchor the state. From which Machiavelli draws a chilling rule. Men must be either pampered or crushed, for they avenge small injuries but cannot avenge grave ones. So any harm a prince does should be so complete that no revenge remains. And like a doctor reading a wasting disease, he must catch political illness early, when it is hard to see but easy to cure. Wait, and it becomes easy to see but impossible to heal. The Romans understood this, and never postponed a war to dodge it, knowing delay only favors the enemy. Louis did the opposite. He made 5 clear mistakes, and ruined himself by helping the church in Spain grow strong on his own doorstep. Whoever makes another powerful, Machiavelli concludes, engineers his own undoing. Chapter 4. Why the kingdom of Darius conquered by Alexander did not rebel against his successors after his death. Here is a puzzle from the ancient world. Alexander the Great overran the whole of Asia in a few years, then died young, his empire barely settled. You would expect it to erupt in revolt. Instead, it stayed calm in his successor's hands. Machiavelli's answer is a brilliant piece of political anatomy. Every kingdom, he says, is governed in one of 2 ways. Either by a single ruler and his servants, ministers who hold their place only by his favor, or by a ruler alongside hereditary nobles, lords with their own lands, their own subjects, and their own ancient claim to loyalty. His 2 living examples are the Turkish Sultan and the King of France. The Sultan rules alone. Everyone around him is his servant, raised and removed at will. The French king is hemmed in by a long line of barons, loved by their own people, whose privileges he cannot touch without danger. Now the paradox. A state ruled like the Turks is hard to take. There are no disgruntled lords to invite you in, and the Sultan's servants are loyal slaves you cannot corrupt. But once you have beaten him and wiped out his family, it is easy to hold, for no one else commands the people's love. A state ruled like France is the reverse. Easy to invade, because some malcontent baron will always open the door, but agony to keep, since the nobles survive to raise rebellion after rebellion. Darius governed like the Sultan. So once Alexander shattered his army and Darius was dead, the empire simply lay quiet. The lesson is cool and structural. How easily a conquest holds depends not on the conqueror's genius but on the shape of the state he took. Chapter 5. How cities or principalities which lived under their own laws should be administered after being conquered. Some conquests come with a special danger. The people once governed themselves. A free city does not forget. Machiavelli lays out 3 ways to hold such a place, and he is unsettlingly blunt about them. First, lay it waste. Second, go and live there in person. Third, let it keep its own laws but exact a tribute and install a friendly inner circle. A few locals who know they cannot survive without you, and so keep the city loyal on your behalf. The ancient record is his evidence. The Spartans tried the gentle path, ruling Athens and Thebes through hand-picked oligarchies, and lost them both. The Romans, to hold Capua, Carthage, and Numantia, destroyed them outright, and never lost them at all. The conclusion is grim. There is no surer way to keep a free city than to ruin it. Whoever takes such a city and does not raise it should expect to be ruined by it instead. Because a republic never forgets the name of liberty or its old institutions. Time does not erase them, nor do the favors of a kind new ruler. At the first opportunity the people reach back for them, as Pisa did after 100 years under Florence. A people used to a prince, by contrast, is easier. Once his line is gone, they cannot agree on a new leader and cannot govern themselves, so they are slow to revolt. But in a republic there is more life, more hatred, a fiercer thirst for revenge. The memory of freedom never lets them rest. With them, Machiavelli says coldly, the only safety lies in scattering them, or in going to live among them yourself. Chapter 6. New Principalities acquired by one's own arms and prowess. Now the highest case, and Machiavelli reaches for the loftiest names. Men walk almost always in the footsteps of others, he says, so a wise man imitates the greatest, and even if he cannot match them, some of their grandeur rubs off. He pictures a skilled archer who, seeing the target is far off, aims well above it, not to shoot high but so the arrow falls true. Aim at the greatest. And the supreme men who rose by their own ability rather than luck are Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, and Theseus. Fortune's gift to them was small. Only opportunity, the raw matter, they supplied the form. Without the opening their prowess would have died unseen. Without their prowess the opening would have passed in vain. Moses needed the Israelites enslaved in Egypt. Romulus needed to be cast out at birth. Cyrus needed the Persians restless under soft Median rule. Theseus needed Athens scattered. The chance was nothing until the man seized it. Such founders are hard to establish and easy to maintain, and the danger is sharpest at the founding, because nothing is harder, Machiavelli warns, than to bring in a new order of things. Every man who thrived under the old order becomes your enemy, while those who might gain under the new defend you only weakly, half from fear and half from disbelief. From this he draws his famous blade of a rule. All the armed prophets conquered, and all the unarmed prophets were destroyed. Savonarola, the friar who swayed Florence with visions, fell the moment the crowd stopped believing, for he had no force to make them believe again. Faith and persuasion are not enough. When the people turn, you must be able to make them hold by force. Chapter 7. New Principalities acquired with the help of fortune and foreign arms. If the last chapter belonged to the self-made founders, this one belongs to their opposite, and to the figure Machiavelli studies more closely than any other. Men who rise purely by luck climb without effort, he says, but cannot stay up. They fly to the top as if on wings, and their troubles begin the moment they land, with no roots and no loyal troops of their own. His great case study is Cesare Borgia, known as Duke Valentino, who won a state through the fortune of his father, Pope Alexander VI, and lost it when that fortune failed. And yet Machiavelli admires him without reserve, holding up this model new prince as the finest a beginner could follow. Watch what Borgia did. Handed power by the French and the papacy, he saw at once that borrowed arms were a trap. So he broke the great Roman families, the Orsini and the Colonna, luring their leaders to the town of Sinigaglia with gifts and warm words, then destroying them in a single stroke. Then comes the episode Machiavelli cannot stop turning over. To pacify the lawless Romagna, Borgia installed a cruel, efficient deputy, Ramiro de Orco, who crushed the disorder. But the cruelty earned hatred, so Borgia cleared himself of it. One morning the people of Cesena woke to find Ramiro lying in the public square, cut in 2 pieces, a block of wood and a bloody knife beside him. The spectacle, Machiavelli writes, left the people at once satisfied and stunned. Borgia laid every foundation a man could lay. He guarded against a hostile future pope. He won the people. He built his own army. He failed only because, at the one moment everything depended on it, his father died and he himself lay mortally ill. His single true mistake came after letting an enemy he had wronged, Julius II, become pope. Whoever believes great men forget old injuries for new favors, Borgia learned, deceives himself. Chapter 8. Those who come to power by crime. There is a road to power that runs through pure atrocity, and Machiavelli walks it without flinching, one ancient example and one from his own day. The ancient is Agathocles the Sicilian, son of a potter, who rose through the army to command Syracuse, and then made himself its master. One morning he gathered the Senate and the richest citizens as if for state business, and at a signal his soldiers cut them all down. He seized the city and held it for years, even beating back Carthage. Yet Machiavelli refuses him the word he reserves for the great. Cannot be called prowess, he says, to murder your fellow citizens and betray your friends. Such methods win you power but never glory. The modern case is Alvarado of Fermo, who staged the same horror as theater. Raised by his uncle Giovanni Fogliani, he returned home a celebrated soldier. He threw a grand banquet for the leading men of the town, his uncle among them. After dinner he led them into a private room, and soldiers waiting in the walls killed everyone. A year later Alvarado died exactly as he had lived, strangled by Cesare Borgia in the same trap that took the Orsini. Then comes the idea that redeems the chapter from being a mere catalogue of murder: cruelty well used and cruelty badly used. Cruelty is used well, Machiavelli says, when it is done all at once, out of necessity, for safety, and then stopped, turned as far as possible to the good of your subjects. It is used badly when it starts small and grows year by year. From this falls one of his most practical laws: inflict all your injuries at a single stroke, so their taste is soon forgotten, and hand out your benefits slowly, a little at a time, so each one is savored. Chapter 9. The Constitutional Principality. There is a gentler way to the top. A private citizen made prince of his own city by his fellow citizens. This needs neither raw prowess nor pure luck, Machiavelli says, but a kind of lucky shrewdness. And it turns on a division he finds in every city on earth: two opposed appetites. The people want only not to be oppressed. The nobles want to oppress. From that clash comes one of three outcomes: a principality, a free republic, or sheer anarchy. A man can be lifted to power by either side. But how he rose decides how he will rule. Rise by the nobles, and you find yourself ringed by men who think themselves your equals, whom you cannot freely command. Rise by the people, and you stand more or less alone, with few around you unwilling to obey. Here Machiavelli plants a claim that startled his age: build on the people. Their aim is more honest, since they ask only to be left alone, while the nobles want to oppress someone. And the cold arithmetic favors the people too. You cannot make yourself safe against a hostile populace, for there are simply too many of them, but the nobles are few and can be made and unmade at will. A prince must always live with the same people. He can do without the nobles. So a wise prince binds the people to him, because in the hour of danger they are his only refuge. Nabis of Sparta, he reminds us, held off all of Greece and a victorious Roman army because his own people stood with him. Let no one repeat the tired proverb that he who builds on the people builds on mud. That is true of a helpless private man, but a prince who can command, who does not lose his nerve, will never be failed by a people he has bound to himself. Chapter 10. How the strength of every principality should be measured. To weigh a prince's real power, Machiavelli proposes a single practical test. Ask whether, in a crisis, he can stand on his own, field an army able to meet any attacker, or whether he must always run to someone else for protection. The first kind of prince he has already discussed. For the second, his advice is plain. Forget the open country, fortify your city, and make yourself hard to swallow. A well-walled town, held by a prince the people do not hate, is a forbidding thing to attack. Men shy away from enterprises whose difficulties are obvious. His model is the free cities of Germany. They obey the emperor only when they please, fearing no neighbor, because they are so well fortified that everyone knows a siege would be long and miserable. They keep deep moats and strong walls, enough artillery, and always a full year's stock of food, drink, and fuel, and, cleverly, a year's supply of materials to keep the common people employed at the trades that are the lifeblood of the town. No besieger can sit idle for a year. But there is an obvious objection. Subjects might crack when they watch their fields and houses burn outside the walls. Machiavelli answers with cold confidence. A spirited prince rides it out, buoying his people with hope and stiffening them with fear of the enemy. The burning, he notes, comes early, while their blood is still up. And once their homes are ash, they are bound all the tighter to the prince in whose defense they were ruined. Men feel obligation, he observes, as much for the harm they suffer for you as for the good you do them. Chapter 11. Ecclesiastical Principalities. There is one kind of state that breaks all of Machiavelli's rules, and he treats it with a faint, dry irony. Church principalities are won by prowess or by fortune, but kept by neither. They are held up by ancient religious institutions so strong that they sustain the ruler no matter how he lives or governs. These princes alone, he says, have states they do not defend and subjects they do not govern, yet are never dislodged. They are, in his pointed phrase, the only princes who are secure and happy. He claims he will not pry into matters raised and sustained by God, and then proceeds with mock restraint to explain in purely worldly terms how the church rose. Before the French invasions, Italy balanced uneasily between 5 powers, and the papacy was kept weak by 2 things: the feuding Roman baronial houses, the Orsini and the Colonna, who quarreled under the Pope's own windows, and the sheer brevity of papal reigns. Barely a decade each, too short to crush a faction before the next pope undid the work. Then came Pope Alexander VI, who showed, more than any pope before him, how much could be done with money and armed force, using his son Cesare Borgia as his instrument and the French invasion as his opening. He aimed only to enlarge his son, yet what he built passed to the church. Then Pope Julius II inherited a church already great, took Bologna, crushed Venice, drove the French from Italy, and did it all, pointedly, for the church and not for any family of his own. In a few decades, the weakest of the Italian powers had become the one that made kings tremble. Chapter 12. Military Organization and Mercenary Troops. Halfway through the book, Machiavelli turns from how states are won to how they are defended, and lays down a foundation stone. The main supports of every state are good laws and good arms, and since you cannot have good laws without good arms, he will speak only of arms. A prince's forces are his own, or mercenary, or auxiliary, or a mix. His verdict on the hired kind is total. Mercenaries are useless and dangerous. Disunited, ambitious, undisciplined, disloyal, brave among friends and cowards before the enemy. They have no reason to die for you but a little pay, which is never reason enough. In peace they rob you, and in war they run. The whole ruin of Italy, he says, came from leaning on them for years. That is why Charles VIII of France could seize the country, in the bitter quip with a piece of chalk, just marking the doors where his soldiers would lodge. And the captains are no better than the men. If a mercenary commander is able, he works to aggrandize himself, usually at your expense. If he is useless, he ruins you the ordinary way. History agrees on every count. Carthage was nearly devoured by its own hired soldiers. Thebes handed its army to Philip of Macedon, who promptly took its freedom. Even Venice, glorious while it fought with its own citizens, faltered once it turned to hired captains, and at the Battle of Vila lost in a single day what 800 years had built. Mercenary armies, Machiavelli warns, bring slow, feeble, doubtful conquests, and sudden, shattering defeat. Rome and Sparta stood armed and free for centuries. The Swiss are armed and free today. The lesson runs under everything. A prince who does not command his own arms commands nothing for long. Chapter 13. Auxiliary, Composite, and Native Troops. If mercenaries are the first poison, auxiliaries are the second, and Machiavelli thinks them worse. Auxiliaries are the troops of a powerful ally, lent to your defense. Their danger is exquisitely simple. If they lose, you are undone with them. If they win, you are their prisoner. Pope Julius II nearly learned this the hard way, calling in the armies of Ferdinand of Spain. Saved only by a stroke of luck when, after his auxiliaries were routed, the Swiss happened to drive off the victors. Cesare Borgia walks back into the argument as the perfect illustration. He began with French auxiliaries, shifted to mercenaries, and grew in stature only when he raised his own troops and stood at last absolute master of his armies. Then Machiavelli reaches for scripture. When young David offered to fight Goliath, King Saul dressed him in royal armor. David tried it on, then shed it, saying he could fight only with his own sling and knife. Another man's armor, runs the moral, always slips off your back, or weighs you down or binds you tight. The drift is relentless toward a single conviction. A wise prince would rather lose with his own men than win with someone else's, for no victory won by foreign arms is truly yours. France itself fights with a mixed force. Its own citizens stiffened with hired Swiss. That is better than purely borrowed arms, yet still far weaker than a true army of one's own. He even traces the fall of Rome to a small beginning, the day the empire first hired the Goths as mercenaries, and the prowess the Romans lost passed to the Goths instead. The conclusion lands like a verdict. Unless a principality commands its own arms, it is never secure, only borrowed, and at the mercy of fortune. Chapter 14. How a Prince Should Organize His Militia. Now Machiavelli states a principle as stark as any in the book. A prince should have no other aim, no other thought, no other craft but war, its organization and its discipline. The art of war is the one art a ruler is expected to master. It keeps hereditary princes on their thrones and lifts ordinary men onto them. Neglect it, and you lose your state. Master it, and you can win one. Francesco Sforza, because he was armed, climbed from private citizen to Duke of Milan. His sons, because they fled the hardships of arms, slid back from dukes to ordinary men. An unarmed man, Machiavelli insists, is simply despised. There is no comparison between the armed and the unarmed, and no reason the armed should ever willingly obey the defenseless. So the prince must train in war even in peace, harder in peace than in war, and in two ways. The first is physical. He must keep his troops drilled, and he must hunt constantly, to harden his body, and to learn the land in his bones. How the mountains rise, how the valleys open, how the rivers and marshes lie, so that he reads any new ground at a glance. The second is mental. He must read history, study how great men carried themselves in war, and take one of them as his model, the way Alexander modeled himself on Achilles, Caesar on Alexander, and Scipio on Cyrus. There is a striking portrait of the Achaean general Philopoemen, who turned every country walk into a lesson, forever posing tactical problems to his companions. Which side would hold the advantage if the enemy seized a ridge, and how to strike without breaking ranks. Peace, Machiavelli says, is the time to prepare. The wise prince stores up readiness against the day his fortune turns. Chapter 15. The things for which men, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. Here the book pivots, and Machiavelli knows it. He is about to describe how a prince should actually behave toward his subjects, and he warns that he will break with everyone who wrote before him. He intends to follow the real truth of the matter, he says, not the imagined picture of it. Many have dreamed up republics and principalities that never existed. But the gap between how men live and how they ought to live is so wide that a prince who studies what should be done, instead of what is done, is marching toward his own destruction. Then the sentence that detonates the whole tradition. A man who wants to act well in every respect, among so many who are not good, is bound to come to ruin. So a prince must learn how not to be good, and use that knowledge or hold it back according to need. He runs quickly through the famous pairs by which rulers are judged: generous or mean, cruel or merciful, faithful or treacherous, bold or cowardly. It would be splendid, he grants, to possess only the qualities held good. But the world does not allow it. So a prince must at least avoid the vices that would lose him his state, and not lose sleep over the lesser ones, and he must not even shrink from a necessary vice, if avoiding it would cost him his rule. For some things that look like virtues practiced faithfully would be his ruin, and some that look like vices bring him safety and strength. It is the most honest and the most disturbing promise in the book, and everything that follows is its proof. Chapter 16. Generosity and Parsimony. Machiavelli tests his new method on the first pair, and the result is deliberately upside down. A reputation for generosity sounds wonderful, he says, and it will destroy you. To keep it, you must spend lavishly and visibly, until your treasury is drained and you are forced to squeeze your people with brutal taxes to feed the show. Then the very generosity meant to win love produces hatred, and a prince who has impoverished himself ends up despised. So the prudent prince accepts being called mean. In time he is seen as the truly generous one, because his thrift lets him live on his revenues, defend himself and campaign without bleeding his subjects. He is generous, in effect, to the countless people he never taxes, and mean only to the few he never gives to. In our own age, Machiavelli notes, only the men reputed mean have achieved great things. Pope Julius used a reputation for generosity to climb to the papacy, then dropped it cold to fund his wars. The King of France wages war after war without extra taxes, because his long thrift had prepared the way. There is one clean exception, and Machiavelli marks it carefully. A prince who spends what belongs to others, the plunder of conquest, should be wildly lavish as Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander were, since giving away strangers' goods only adds to his name. It is spending your own that destroys you. Generosity, he concludes, is uniquely self-defeating. The more you practice it, the less able you become to practice it. Far wiser to bear the name of miser, which brings disrepute but no hatred, than to chase a name for generosity into rapacity, which brings hatred and disrepute together. Chapter 17. Cruelty and Compassion, and whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the reverse. This is the chapter that made Machiavelli notorious, and he builds to its claim with care. A prince should prefer a name for mercy over one for cruelty, he begins, but he must not misuse mercy. Cesare Borgia was called cruel, yet that cruelty unified the Romagna and gave it peace. He was, in truth, more compassionate than the Florentines who, to avoid the word cruel, let the city of Pistoia tear itself apart. Then the great question, is it better to be loved or feared? One would wish to be both, Machiavelli answers, but since the two rarely sit together, it is far safer to be feared. And his reason is a famously bleak verdict on human nature. Men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers, who shun danger and grasp at gain. While you serve them, they are wholly yours, offering blood and children when peril is far off, but the moment danger comes near, they turn away. Love is a bond of obligation that men, being wretched, snap whenever it serves them. Fear is held by a dread of punishment that never lets go. Yet here Machiavelli draws his crucial line. Be feared but never hated. And the two are easily kept apart. A prince avoids hatred by keeping his hands off his subjects' property and their women. Above all their property. Men sooner forget the death of a father than the loss of their inheritance. He proves the point with 2 soldiers. Hannibal held a vast army of many races together through every reverse by his sheer inhuman cruelty. Scipio, all mildness, saw his troops mutiny in Spain because his leniency let discipline rot. Rely, then, on what you control. You cannot command love, but you can command fear, and you can always refuse to be hated. Chapter 18. How Princes Should Honor Their Word. Everyone praises a prince who keeps faith and lives with integrity, Machiavelli concedes, and then turns the praise on its head. The princes who have done great things, he observes, are precisely those who gave their word lightly, knew how to twist men with cunning, and in the end outlasted the honest. There are 2 ways of fighting, he says, by law, which is human, and by force, which belongs to beasts. Since the first often falls short, a prince must know how to use the second, to be, when he must, a beast as well as a man. The ancients taught this in the myth of Achilles, raised by the centaur Chiron, half man and half horse, so that he might learn both natures. And of the beasts a prince must imitate 2, the fox and the lion. The lion cannot protect itself from traps, the fox cannot fight off wolves, so one must be a fox to know the snares, and a lion to frighten the wolves. Those who play only the lion, he adds, understand nothing. From this comes his coldest counsel. A wise ruler cannot and should not keep his word when it works against him and the reasons he gave it are gone. If all men were good, the rule would be wrong. But they are not, and they would not keep faith with you, so you need not keep it with them. A prince need not truly have the good qualities, Machiavelli says, but he must seem to have them. He should appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and devout, and even be so, yet keep his mind ready to become the opposite the instant it is required. For men judge by the eyes, not the hands. Everyone sees what you seem, few touch what you are. And in the end, he says, men look only at the result. Chapter 19. The Need to Avoid Contempt and Hatred. This is the longest chapter in the book, and it gathers the moral of all the rest into a single command. Whatever else a prince does, he must not be hated or despised. He earns hatred above all by seizing his subjects' property and their women. Let those alone, and most men stay content. He earns contempt by seeming fickle, frivolous, soft, cowardly, irresolute. So he must project grandeur, courage, gravity, and strength, and make his judgments final. A prince held in such esteem is hard to conspire against. And conspiracy, Machiavelli argues, is the prince's great internal danger, but it is far weaker than it looks. The conspirator acts in fear, must find accomplices, and every accomplice is a potential informer who can win pardon and reward by betraying him. Against all that stands the majesty of the state and, decisively, the goodwill of the people. So long as a prince keeps the people on his side, the plotter has nowhere to stand, for even if he strikes, he has no refuge among a hostile crowd. He points to France as the model of wise institutions, and to its parliament above all, a neutral third body that bridles the nobles and shields the people, while letting the king keep the favors for himself and push the hatred onto others. Then comes the long, brilliant gallery of Roman emperors, from Marcus Aurelius to Maximinus, who carried a burden ordinary princes do not. They had also to satisfy a greedy, brutal soldiery, whose wishes ran clean against the people's. Some good men fell anyway, Pertinax and Alexander Severus, undone by armies that scorned their decency, and one is hated, Machiavelli notes, as much for good deeds as for evil. The master example is Severus, who played the fox and the lion to perfection. He tricked his rival Albinus with the gift of a co-emperor's title while he crushed another, then turned and destroyed Albinus too. Caracalla, brave but monstrous, butchered so widely that a single resentful centurion killed him among his own troops. Across every reign the verdict holds. Emperors fell to hatred or to contempt, and nothing else. Chapter 20. Whether fortresses and many of the other present-day expedients to which princes have recourse are useful or not. Princes reach for all sorts of devices to hold a state, disarming their subjects, keeping their towns divided, courting the men they once suspected, building fortresses or tearing them down. Machiavelli weighs each and refuses any universal verdict. It all turns on circumstance. Still, he leans hard in places. A new prince, he says, should never disarm his subjects. He should arm them because arming them arms you, turning the suspect into the loyal and subjects into partisans. Disarm them, and you confess your mistrust and breed the very hatred you feared. As for keeping towns divided by faction, an old piece of cunning, he flatly rejects it. A divided city falls at the first push of an invader, when the weaker faction simply defects. He grants that suspect men often prove more loyal than trusted friends, since they strive to erase a bad first impression. Pandolfo Petrucci of Siena governed by leaning on exactly such men. Then the fortresses. They can shelter a prince or curb a rebellion, yet many wise rulers have raised them to hold a state more securely. The real test is who you fear. Build fortresses if you fear your own people more than foreigners, and forget them if you fear foreigners more than your people. But the deepest line cuts under all of it. The best fortress that exists, Machiavelli says, is not to be hated by the people. Stone walls will not save a prince his people loathe. Once they rise, they never lack a foreign hand to help them. And a prince who trusts his fortresses and shrugs at the people's hatred has built on sand. Chapter 21. How a prince must act to win honor. Nothing makes a prince more admired, Machiavelli says, than great enterprises and rare, striking deeds. His living model is Ferdinand of Aragon, the King of Spain, who rose from a weak ruler to the first king of Christendom. Study his moves. He opened his reign by attacking Granada, a campaign that built his power and, cleverly, kept the restless barons of Castile busy with war so they had no time to plot at home. Always under the cloak of religion, he drove a hunted people from his kingdom, then struck at Africa, at Italy, at France, one grand stroke following another, so that his subjects lived in perpetual suspense and wonder, and never had the quiet to conspire. The second counsel is sharper still. Never be neutral. A prince wins honor by declaring himself plainly a true friend or a true enemy, rather than standing aside. If two neighbors fight, take a side. Stay neutral, and the winner will treat you as a prize and the loser will despise you for refusing him. You end at the mercy of whoever wins, with no one obliged to shelter you. Declare yourself, and even a powerful victor is bound to you, while a defeated ally will take you in. There is one guardrail. Never join a stronger power in a war of aggression if you can help it, for in victory you become its prisoner. No course is ever wholly safe, Machiavelli warns. Every escape from one danger opens onto another, and prudence is simply the art of choosing the least bad. He closes on a softer note. A prince should honor talent, let his people trade and farm without fear of seizure or ruinous tax, and stage festivals in season, yet never, for an instant, let slip the dignity of his rank. Chapter 22. A prince's personal staff. A prince is judged, first of all, by the men he keeps around him. The choice of ministers, Machiavelli says, is no small matter, because the world reads a ruler's own intelligence in the quality of his servants. Competent and loyal men, and he is thought wise. Poor ones, and his very first error stands exposed, for he chose them. He offers a neat ladder of minds. There are three kinds of intelligence. The first understands things for itself, the second can recognize what others understand, and the third grasps neither. The first is excellent, the second still good, the third useless, for even a prince who is no genius can rule well if he can at least tell good counsel from bad. Then he gives a single, reliable test for any minister. Watch whether the man thinks more about himself than about you, and seeks his own profit in everything he handles. If so, he will never be a good servant, and you can never trust him, because a man entrusted with the state must forget himself and think only of his prince. And there is a way to keep him faithful. The prince must, for his part, honor the minister, enrich him, bind him with gratitude, and share both the honors and the burdens, so that the minister sees how wholly his fortune depends on his master, has so much that he wants no more, and so many offices that he dreads any change. When prince and minister are tied together that closely, they can trust each other. When they are not, it ends badly for one or the other. Chapter 23. How Flatterers Must Be Shunned. Courts swarm with flatterers, Machiavelli warns, and they are a plague a prince can barely escape, because men so love their own affairs, and deceive themselves so readily, that they are wide open to it. Yet the obvious cure is itself a danger. Guard against flattery by letting everyone speak freely, and you lose respect. So he prescribes a careful middle way. A wise prince chooses a few wise men and grants them alone the freedom to tell him the truth, and only on the matters he asks about, nothing else. He should question them closely, listen patiently, and then decide entirely on his own. Beyond that handful he should heed no one, hold firmly to his decision, and let it be known that the more boldly a man speaks the truth, the more welcome he will be. His warning example is Maximilian, the Holy Roman Emperor, a secretive man who confides in nobody and takes no advice, so that the moment his hidden plans surface and meet resistance, he is talked out of them, and what he does one day he undoes the next. A prince must never lack counsel, Machiavelli concludes, but he must take it when he wants it, not when others press it on him. And he punctures a comforting myth, that a ruler can seem shrewd merely by surrounding himself with shrewd advisers. It is the reverse. Good advice, wherever it comes from, depends on the good judgment of the prince who weighs it, never the judgment of the prince on good advice. Chapter 24. Why the Italian princes have lost their states. Now Machiavelli turns the whole argument toward home, and toward an accusation. A new prince who follows these rules, he says, soon looks as though he had reigned for generations, and stands more secure than an old dynasty, because men are won far more by the present than by the past, and prowess captures their loyalty more surely than royal blood. He has a twofold glory. He founded the state, and he adorned it with good laws and good arms. Yet the princes of Italy, the king of Naples, the duke of Milan, and the rest lost everything in living memory. Not to bad luck, Machiavelli insists, but to their own failings. First, every one of them was weak in arms. Second, each had either made an enemy of the people or, holding the people, had failed to keep the nobles. States strong enough to put an army in the field are never lost otherwise. And then the line that turns loss into indictment. These princes must not blame fortune, but their own indolence. In calm weather they never imagined a storm, the common human failing of never expecting the sea to change. And when the storm broke, they thought of flight, not defense, trusting that the people would tire of the conqueror and call them back. It is a poor hope to lie down counting on someone to lift you up. The only defenses that are sound, sure, and lasting, Machiavelli ends, are the ones that rest on yourself and your own prowess. Chapter 25. How far human affairs are governed by fortune, and how fortune can be opposed. Near the end, Machiavelli faces the deepest question under the whole book. How much of our lives does fortune control, and how much is left to us? Many in his shaken age believe the world is so ruled by chance and by God that human effort changes nothing. Better to let events sweep you along. He half feels the pull of it himself. But to save our free will, he stakes out a famous middle ground. Fortune, he judges, governs about half of what we do, and leaves the other half, more or less, to us. His image is unforgettable. Fortune is like one of those violent rivers that, in flood, tear down trees and buildings and drown the plains, irresistible in the moment. Yet when the river runs calm, men can build dikes and embankments, so that the next flood is channeled and far less wild. Fortune shows her full power, he says, exactly where no such defenses have been raised. And Italy, he notes bitterly, is a country without embankments. Then the subtler half of his theory. A prince thrives when his way of acting fits the times, and fails when it no longer does. One man moves with caution, another with boldness, and each may win, until the times shift, and the man who cannot change his nature is ruined by his own consistency. Pope Julius II succeeded because his headlong impetuosity happened to suit his moment. A more cautious pope would have failed where he charged through. And so Machiavelli reaches his last, provocative verdict. Since fortune is changeable while men are obstinate, it is better, on balance, to be bold than cautious. Fortune, he says in his most notorious image, is like a woman, who yields to the man who is daring and ardent rather than to the one who proceeds coldly. Chapter 26. Exhortation to liberate Italy from the barbarians. The cold analyst ends in fire. Having laid out the whole hard science of power, Machiavelli asks whether the moment is right for a new prince to redeem Italy, and answers that no moment was ever riper. Just as Israel had to be enslaved for Moses to appear, the Persians oppressed for Cyrus, the Athenians scattered for Theseus, so Italy had to be brought to her knees. Leaderless, beaten, overrun, more enslaved than the Hebrews, for an Italian spirit to prove its worth. A man once seemed chosen by God to redeem her, he writes, glancing at the fallen Cesare Borgia, only to be cast aside by fortune at his peak. Now Italy lies waiting, he says, praying for someone to heal her wounds and end the long plunder of her cities. See how she begs for a deliverer. See how ready she is to follow a banner, if only someone will raise it. He turns directly to the house of Medici, favored by fortune, by God, and by the Church, and lays the task at their feet. It will not be so hard, he urges, with those great founders as their guide. And the cause is just, for war is just when there is no other choice, and arms are holy when they are the only hope. But the analyst never fully sleeps. The reason Italian armies have failed, he explains, is bad military systems and weak leaders. So the new prince must, before all else, raise an army of his own people, citizen soldiers, the only sure foundation. He even sketches the tactics to beat the dreaded Swiss and Spanish infantry. Then he closes the book, so coldly argued, with a cry of hope, borrowing Petrarch's lines, that virtue will take up arms against fury, and the fight will be short, for the ancient Roman valor is not yet dead in Italian hearts.